Yesterday, I had the chance to speak to Kim Sherwood, the author of the new James Bond book, Double or Nothing. And now I'm going to share with you a chat I had with somebody else, David Lowbridge-Ellis from License to Queer. He's a guy who inspired me with his support and passion for this book so much that I wanted to have a chat with him and geek out about all of the James Bond things to do with Double or Nothing. So I hope you enjoy it. Stay tuned. So here I am with a returning guest, David Lowbridge-Ellis, who everybody might know from the brilliant License to Queer blog and Instagram account. David, how are you doing? You just came back from Amsterdam. We're here to talk about Kim Sherwood's new James Bond book, Double or Nothing. But how are you first?
Yeah, really good. As you said, literally yesterday, got back off a short cruise to Bruges and Amsterdam, ticking off those places featured in Bond films. Still a lot to go, but Amsterdam has been top of the list for a long while. You might have heard me talk, other people might have heard me talk about this on other podcasts and things. I've been trying to persuade my husband to take me to Amsterdam for years. Finally, he relented. So yeah, it was really good, and especially as I got to meet Fenner, one of the writers on License to Queer, there as well, face to face. So it's nice that we're finally, all these friends we kind of made during lockdowns and things like that, it's nice that we're actually getting to meet them face to face, and sometimes in their home cities as well.
Which is, I mean, amazing. I'm just trying to work out how you convinced your husband. Did you he opened the cupboard and there'll be like tulips in there?
You know what? Actually, I think they're still down here. This is not going to be a very good. Here you go. I swear I didn't know you were going to ask me that, but it was a Christmas present last December, and he teased the reveal of where we were going. So there were some plastic tulips somewhere. Would you settle for a tulip? Yes. But also, and I've never worn them.
Well, are they in your size?
They're a bit big.
Oh,
yeah, they're a bit big. I'm a size 11, and I think these are probably a size 12. But probably not the most comfortable thing. Apparently, people still wear them to go to work in. Apparently, I forgot to ask Fenner about that one. I'll have to message her later.
I'm gonna have that rattling around in my brain for the rest of the day. Well, I'm so excited to be here. So we're recording this a few days before the launch of Kim's book, Double or Nothing. So to anybody listening who doesn't know the background, the James Bond estate gives people the permission to write books, and we've just finished this trilogy by Anthony Horowitz, like world famous, highly respected thriller writer, and the estate of Ian Fleming picked Kim Sherwood, who has written one book before, to pen a trilogy of books in which James Bond is missing. And the first one in this trilogy, Double or Nothing, is about to be released in a few days. And we were both lucky enough to get advanced reading copies from HarperCollins. So we got to read them ahead of time, and we got to chat to Kim. So we've got like some insider knowledge. And I just thought it'd be really interesting to talk to you, David, because this book means something to you. It is important to you. And I think it's a really important thing to talk to people for whom these books are important. Everyone's always making videos about, the James Bond films that most people don't like, but they love. Everyone has a personal reason why something is important. And that's the awesomeness about James Bond as a big sandbox. So I'm just talking on and on and on. I'm going to pass it over to you, David. Say something smart.
Well, I find it impossible to be objective about this book. I have written my own review of the book, and I had to go through and take out all of the superlative adjectives because I was just like, yes, it's a review, but it's kind of, I don't put stars or anything on books I review. I'm lucky that, I get to, this isn't the only Bond book I've had ahead of publication to kind of have a read through. And you do sort of feel a sense of responsibility to obviously be very positive, and I'm fortunate every book I've ever been asked to review I've unequivocally loved. But this one, yeah, as I say, I find it impossible to be objective about, not only because it's an amazing James Bond story in its own right with great set, if you parse a James Bond story down to its constituent elements of, the action sequences, the set pieces, the drinks, the or the clothes, and all the kind of lifestyle stuff, as well as all the story elements and whatever, it's got all of that. All of that is done absolutely brilliantly. But I think in a sense it's almost greater than the sum of its parts. But some of the parts are so groundbreaking for a James Bond story. And the obvious one, and it goes without saying that we're gonna spoil this, because there are so many parts in the first 50 pages of when I had a chat with Kim. I limited myself to the first 50 pages because I was like, I don't want to spoil so much of this. And this book has so many surprises. I was just rereading the ending just before we started recording as well, and there's something in the last few pages which is just like, oh my god, she went there. But there are so many of those moments, even right at the start of the book. So I'm kind of talking around the issue. There's a gay 00 in this book. Okay, right. So of all the things I've ever wanted to see appear in a James Bond book, and not just even a side character, but arguably the main character, it's hard to choose between the three 00s because they're all brilliant and so different from each other. But Kim herself said that a lot of people like 004 the most, Dryden, which isn't to say I didn't connect with the other characters. I certainly did connect with Joanna and Sid, and I can't wait to hear which one your favorite was. But for me, having a gay 00 is so validating in a lot of ways, and I think opens up the Bond books. And if this was ever to be made into a TV series or film, which it should be, then it would definitely open up Bond fandom to a much broader fan base. I mean, even beyond Dryden, we've got a character who's one of the other 00s is Sudanese Pakistani.
Yeah, Sid Bashir.
Harwood's heritage is Irish. I'm going to get this wrong, Roland. Is it Irish, French, Algeria? What's Joanna's?
I think it was the North African. But the thing about Joanna Harwood, where's the Easter egg?
The Easter egg in terms of her name. Yes. Yeah, exactly. And absolutely, because
hang on, pause a second. Just if anyone didn't know that, Joanna Harwood was the co-writer of Dr. No and From Russia with Love, I believe, and like put in invaluable stuff. So that's why it's such a great Easter egg to have a character named after her. I stop.
No. So long story short, as you said, long story short, Joanna Harwood wrote the first draft of Dr. No, based heavily on Fleming. Loads of other people paid much more than her, came on board, messed it around a bit, and then she was paid to take it back and put it back right the way it was in the first place, pretty much. Which is not doing a disservice to some of the other writers like Richard Maybaum, who but some of the others. She pretty much had final say on the script to Dr. No, and then she did the first treatment with From Russia with Love as well. So without her, I've always argued that we wouldn't have the Bond that we love so much, which I always think is a really great mix of kind of masculine and feminine qualities.
100% agree.
It's so important that she's called that, and by now I'm sure most people who've seen any coverage of this book know the naming for Sid Bashir. So my husband's a massive Star Trek fan, so that was really
was a question I asked Kim, because I was like, Bashir, come on, because I love DS9. I think that's such a great show, and our man Bashir was such a great episode that was James Bond iconic. And
I can't remember where it is. You'll see I've got notes and stuff stuck in my copy here. But that phrase, and I can't find it now, but that phrase, our man Bashir, does actually appear in the text of this book as well. There's so many little Easter eggs and things for Fleming addicts. And it's just so good.
Yeah, and that's kind of part of the fun of it. Her first book, Testament, had a lot of James Bond Easter eggs. Well, no, like 4 or 5. And it was just, it's like, oh, she's one of us. Which totally. I think is
massive fan. I mean, in terms of the gay 00 thing, I don't want it to appear like this is, she's ticking diversity boxes here. I really don't think that's the case. I think that she's making an MI6 which is just far more representative of what the real MI6 is probably like. But I know that there might be some people out there in the Bond fandom who, and I'm aware of this, running a website called License to Queer, that they think that what kind of skin do queer people have in the James Bond game? And my raison d'etre is to kind of say, well, actually, we've got a massive, we've got a lot of us invest a lot of time and energy into James Bond because we see so much of ourselves, and so much of the world of James Bond is so relatable, even without LGBTQ plus characters. But the fact that we actually now have one, and the fact that his romance with his former boyfriend, like, Paris Carver style from Tomorrow Never Dies, he's pretty much ordered to pump his former lover for information, and that's kind of one of the main threads through the whole book. And especially because you're a romance novelist, obviously, I'm sure you appreciated that there are obviously two main romance threads through the story, three if you sort of consider the role of the role that Bond has played in some of the characters' lives, and there's some kind of polyamorous possibilities being played with at some points of this book, which I'm sure you identified as well. But essentially, you do have a gay romance at the heart of a Bond book, and it is really, really flipping affecting. I found it so anyway.
No, and I think that's a wonderful thing to do. So for those who aren't familiar with the setup of the Double O trilogy, Double or Nothing is the first book in that series. It's set in the present day, and James Bond is missing, and so there are three Double O agents who are linked to him. There's Joanna Harwood, sorry, who's 003.
I'll do the auto cue.
Oh, that's brilliant. There we go. There's Joanna Harwood.
For some reason, I kept getting 004 and 009 mixed up when I read it the first time. So, yeah.
I wouldn't have been able to do that from memory. There's Joseph Dryden, of course, and there is Sid Bashir. And so basically this novel is about the trail of breadcrumbs they follow that leads them towards a big, scary plot, but also what happened to James Bond, where he went and stuff like that. And I think it's a really, really, really valuable concept to have a series of books without James Bond, because I don't know, are you the kind of person who reads the Anthony Horowitz books as soon as they come out and stuff like that?
Oh god, yeah, I usually read them the day they're released. If I'm not at work, I actually just sit there and read it cover to cover without moving until I've read the whole thing. His last one, With a Mind to Kill, that came out a couple of months ago, I think, and it was just that. I really enjoyed it, but I have to admit, at the end of it, I was kind of like, okay, I'm kind of full now, because it's like Stake Free. All of the James Bond novels recently, they've been really well written. They've really had all of the ticks for like the Easter eggs that we wanted things. But I'm kind of like, I'm kind of full on that particular thing of period James Bond things that are intertwined with his other novels, because you've got the 12 Ian Fleming novels, and there's only so much you can mine without then taking a break. So I considered the whole concept for this trilogy to be like a palate cleanser. And then obviously the Secret Service is a bigger organization than just James Bond. We're always hearing about these other double O's, and if you look into real life spy history at the moment, like, how are we going to be doing fighting this so-called war on terror without British agents of Muslim descent or Muslim heritage, something like that? That's a real life example of somebody we have. You posted that brilliant thing, that poster of advertising The Spy Who Loved Me, which started off with, like, must be fiction because it's a spy who likes girls, because of course so much of the scandal and controversy in the 60s with the British spy agencies, with the fact that there were homosexuals in there. Homosexuals. Yes. To put it in the BBC pronunciation, homosexual.
So yeah, I mean, Joseph Dryden seems like just such a natural choice to a real. It seems like it's almost been an omission not to have a gay secret agent in like the James Bond world before, because that's what the real life spy agencies at the time were like. And then of course you've got Joanna Harwood, who's a woman, and I hear women are doing all sorts of things these days.
A woman.
But again, you couldn't have spycraft without women. Women since time immemorial have been the backbone of spying and espionage. Just look at Mata Hari, the most famous real spy of all time. So it seems it's a really accurate representation as well. Wow, I spent a lot of time saying that.
Johanna is so compelling because she's so adaptable to all of her environments. She even manages to pass a different gender. We hear in one of her previous missions, which I think might be explored in subsequent novels. I have no insider insight there, but Kim and I did talk about that element, and I thought that was a particularly interesting queer resonance, and it probably will be for other people as well. So she's just such a compelling character in her own right because of that adaptability, but at the same time she's not actually the one who really uses her sexuality, because a lot of the times it's thought that women get and one of my favorite TV shows of all time is Alias, and that plays with those ideas that it's Jennifer Garner, obviously an incredibly attractive woman. She manages to kind of seduce guards. Bond has always been doing this. You know, Bond even does a bit of a seduction routine in some, especially in the Connery movies, like in the you could interpret when he escapes from that cell in Goldfinger as him sort of chatting up the guard. There are those elements always in there, but it's interesting that she's not the most sexualized character. It's actually Dryden. He's the kind of, you know, he has to go out, and to use the phrase from Russia with Love, Kim's favorite Bond novel, he has to go out and pimp for England. Essentially, that's what Dryden has to do. And his country, you know, Moneypenny sends him out on that mission, and so he gets that kind of more traditional Bond role in some ways.
And I mean, why not? I think that's the thing. I think there's a lot of people talk about things being woke these days and stuff like that. But if you've happened to have a 00 agent who is gay, and he's specifically being asked to seduce somebody who is, that shouldn't be. It's like we're making this video, and it seems like one of those things that it must be very frustrating for you to sort of have to defend it as a thing, but actually it's validating at the same time. You're not even defending it. You're like,
oh no. It's the fact that it's just there, and that everyone in MI6 is completely nonplussed. I mean, the scene which essentially outs Dryden to the reader is beautifully handled. You know, Kim Sherwood doesn't identify as queer herself, but clearly, you know, she's obviously an incredibly talented writer who can get inside so many. You know, this is the reason why I don't write fiction, because I find, you know, I'm in awe of people like Kim and yourself, because I cannot get out of my own head long enough to create characters. She gets inside everybody's head so well, and she knows those characters, that it never comes across as tokenistic or false. It's just completely sincere. You know, we have a gay sex scene in a Bond novel, first time ever, and it reads completely authentically. This is a world, though, in which homophobia does exist, and both Dryden and his lover do encounter that. And that scene is one of the most like fist pumping for a gay reader, where these two eminently capable, really muscular guys who just have, you know, they are gay, and they face homophobia in a public place, in a bar, but then it's like, we're not tolerating this. And then this amazing brawl kicks off, of which of course they're the victors. Yeah, it's just so empowering.
It was kind of like that scene in Kingsman where he shuts the door on the guys. Yeah, no, and I can imagine that was one of the action sequences was very good. Okay, I know where I was going with what I was going to ask. Yeah, Kim has an amazing way of getting into characters' heads, because I just, with her previous book, Testament, there was this relationship with these two brothers that was set in the past, but it resonated so deeply with me. I like had tears streaming down my eyes.
Oh yeah, so, like, I was buckets.
How sort of resonant was her portrayal of Joseph Dryden when you were like inside his head? Did that?
I mean, I'm not going to claim to know what it's like to be black and disabled and gay, and you know, he's at so many intersections of being marginalized, that I'm not going to claim any kind of you know, because I don't consider myself to be disabled. I'm clearly not black. So you
are ginger.
I am ginger, so I am in a minority. Yeah, but a slightly more privileged minority by and large.
Yes, that was sarcasm, by the way, for anybody.
But that side of him, and it doesn't go too much into the homophobia of his youth. There are some threads there, but certainly feeling like an outsider, and as he's got lots of reasons to feel like an outsider. But then again, I think I've always maintained that Bond is always an outsider. Fleming says it categorically in Moonraker, and it's said in a few more subtle ways throughout some of the other novels.
I mean,
And
what we spoke about last time was exactly that.
yeah,
Like how the outsider element brings so many of us into the community.
And but the brilliant thing is, with the secret agent, there's someone who can move through these worlds, even though they're outsiders. That they can, you know, literally with Joanna, I think she uses the word passing, or at least that's the idea. The idea that you can pass in those worlds, while at the same time feeling not a part of those worlds. I think it's really interesting that this is such a globe-trotting Bond novel. So many different locations, and it's so impressive that Sherwood managed to write this without visiting most of those places. You know, she literally couldn't visit those places because it was during lockdowns. But it's so good at moving through so many different environments, but always taking that character's perspective with us.
And I think that helps because we see it through their eyes with some kind of basis in our own thing. I'm going off on another tangent. I was it's not really a tangent, just thinking about like, Joseph Dryden, that outsider feeling, but that's the same for Sid and that's the same for Joanna. Like part of it, but on the and I kind of like that because that then becomes a thread about all 00 agents. Yeah. And then it makes you think like anybody could be a 00 agent.
They're literally, well, you know, they are marked out by their license to kill, and I've always thought there's a bit of a I've never really pulled. I tried and almost pulled on this thread when I was writing something once, and I thought, I'll leave it alone for now. So if anyone else has got further thoughts on this, please get in touch. But I've always thought it's almost a bit like the mark of Cain from the Bible. It's that, you know, because you are a murderer, a state-sanctioned murderer, you're always going to be something of a pariah. And because they see, no one knows that they're hired assassins, state-sanctioned assassins, but they feel that, you know, and it is there in some of this book actually, and in some of Fleming, that whole soul-sickening. There's a reference to, because obviously, although Bond isn't in the book per se, he is in the book quite a lot because other characters are recalling things, and even Bond's saying at some point to Johanna that you can only do this for so long, and that's there in Casino Royale as well, isn't it? In the film version, he says to Vesper, you know, I need to go while I've still got some soul left, and Fleming starts off Casino Royale by talking about soul erosion. So they feel different to the rest of society, which I think is, as you just said, it's a bit weird that we've never had an openly queer 00 character in one of these novels, because it just seems to fit so well.
That's interesting. I often think that the James Bond novels get a bad rap for like being sexist or misogynistic. I think there are some great elements and threads there, but they've never been overt about them. And that's the James Bond universe is almost like a giant sandbox to me. And I think that's what HarperCollins has done. Well, sorry, the estate of Ian Fleming has done so well. It's like they've got over the mistake of letting one author write dozens and dozens of books. So John Gardner books, like they're not necessarily the ones you read. Giving different authors different opportunities to write one book or 3 books is great fun, because it's like the James Bond universe is your sandbox, and then you can play with it how you want. And it's exciting, and I just think it's a really bold choice to have an author who's only written one book before play in this sandbox. But it's so exciting to see like how much it resonates with you.
It's so, you just said it. I think you said it feels fresh. It feels exciting. It really does feel like there are obviously still rules to play within, you know, within the sandbox to an extent, but there are so many times where I thought, and I applaud every single choice, but I was thinking, whoa, that was bold. And there was also part of me thinking, how are some people, not you and I, but how are some people in the Bond fandom going to receive some of these choices? Was there anything that kind of stood out to you in that regard?
I think one of the challenges that we have in the environment at the moment is, you know, there are an awful lot of people, not necessarily with good agendas, claiming everything's woke. And at the same time, that then means when you do anything differently, it gets a spotlight of it. Are you doing that differently because you want to experiment with doing something that differently, or are you doing it because you're quote unquote woke? And so I think it makes it quite a sensitive environment to try doing anything differently. But when you think of some of the issues that people might have with things, I think one of the biggest issues some people might have is the fact that it's set in the present day. They're like, where's my period Bond? We just went Horowitz. And you think that's a criticism that people might have that has nothing to do with the other aspects of the book. And yet, I don't know. I don't know whether people are going to have a negative reaction to it. I hope not. That's the best thing about the James Bond community, is it's the least toxic fan community I've ever been part of. And it's so inclusive. And I've got friends from all sorts of different backgrounds now, interested in different microsets of that. And there's just always been this positivity. So I'm hoping that people, I think the Bond community as a whole has really embraced and adopted Kim. They're like, as soon as she was showing us a bookshelf, it's like, she's one of us. And then, you know, her grandfather's George Baker. It's like,
oh, she's an uber nerd.
Yeah.
It's just like abundant in everything she posts. So yeah, I think that goes a long way. I mean, there are so many parts of the there are parts from the films. I don't want to spoil the enjoyment of this. We've probably already said perhaps a little bit too much without revealing any major plot points.
Oh, I was going to ask about those later, so don't be.
Yeah, okay. There are specific callbacks to even like 006 from Goldeneye appears in there, and you're just like, oh my god. I mean, she doesn't say Trevelyan, but it's really obvious she's talking about Trevelyan and, you know, double O's who've betrayed people. And then one of my favorites, which recurs, it appears right at the start and then keeps coming back through. She uses Fleming's idea of the hurricane room, which is, I'm going to get this wrong. It's on the flight it is in the flight from Russia with Love, isn't it? Where Bond gets terrified. I did write it down somewhere just to double check. I'm 99% sure it's in From Russia with Love. I'm going to be kicking myself if I've got the wrong one. But yeah, that when Bond suffers turbulence on the plane, and he retreats into his hurricane room, which is his way of dealing with anxiety, essentially CBT. So, you know, we talk about, you know, bringing mental health issues into Bond and whatever, you know, that might be considered one of the woke elements. They've always been there. They just had different names. I mean, Fleming himself even said, you wouldn't be able to write things that I write if you weren't neurotic. So Fleming was touching, he said, I don't want to look too much into the psychology behind it, but there was an awful lot of stuff in there already. And yeah, so essentially Bond doing CBT on a plane which might fall out the sky, that idea of retreating into the hurricane room, which is the place in a tropical environment where when a hurricane starts, that's the part of the house you go to feel safe. And that idea of the hurricane room keeps coming through. And Bond has taught that CBT technique to the other agents who he's been mentoring as well. Things like that. There are so many. I've read it twice, and on the second time I spotted, because I read it so quickly the first time. The second time I took my time, and there are so many, and I'm sure I've still missed loads. But there are so many specific bits of Fleming, but she never does it in a way where you feel like, oh, she's just retreading the same ground. It's to anchor it in that Bond universe, but that then gives her license to take it somewhere that you don't expect it to go.
Yeah, I love that. That was such a great example of tying it in there. And but I think one of the challenges, of course, is this book is set in the modern day. And so there's that weird continuity challenge that you have. But in some ways, that also is intrinsic to Bond. It's these anchor points that are so important, because when you look through the different Bond movies, they often have anchor points to a previous movie that doesn't make any sense in the context of the actor or the scenario or anything like that. But it just makes everything part of this tapestry. And that means even the low points. I was thinking, I watched View to a Kill the other day with my daughter, and I was like, if this wasn't a Bond film, I don't necessarily know whether this would be as cherished a classic as it is, but that's because it's interwoven with all of the other Bond films. And
there was me thinking you'd chosen that backdrop to honor A View to a Kill, not your time living in Paris.
Well, I mean, it was really fun watching it, but I was just like, this would have been an action movie that nobody would ever thought twice about. But because it's part of a Bond thing, that it's part of this wonderful texture, and it stays there forever. And so I think this is really exciting, having this trilogy of books with these different characters, because they're now interwoven into this literary canon that goes back to the 1960s.
I overuse this analogy, but I always think of Bond as like, when you just mentioned canon and continuity and all those things, I just want to throw those things out the window when it goes to Bond. Having said that, there are those I think anchor points is a nice analogy, but I always think of it as like a palimpsest. So you would like erase what has come before, but you'd still be able to see the parts that were there, like a wax tablet that the Greeks used to use. So you can still see the previous versions of Bond. So in this Bond set present day, Alec Trevelyan existed from Goldeneye. And agents were trained on how to use a hurricane room from Fleming. She's cherry-picked all of her favorite bits, and there's very specific callbacks to Tomorrow Never Dies, because she loves that film. And Die Another Day is actually referenced quite a lot.
She and I are the secret Die Another Day like aficionados.
Oh yeah. And so she's taken all of her favorite parts of Bond and just like gone, yeah, just using all of that, but then building her brilliant creation on top of that.
I've been watching the Marvel movies, and I love the idea of this multiverse, and I almost think that with James Bond, it's a multiverse. And so, especially in the literary world, because you got Ian Fleming's books, and maybe you include Colonel Sun then, but then you've got like the authorized biography of James Bond is like its own separate universe, but it has so many of the same things happen. And then the Gardner universe happened, and then the Benson verse, and then you've got these things. So we're creating the Sherwood verse, which means, their characters, maybe they're played by different actors, but the same things happen to them, just like in the movies, how Roger Moore visits Teresa's grave, even though he was literally a different man when that happened. It's those little threads that work to create their own separate universes. And I think then it's like a sandbox, because then you can do what you want, and it's got that root in there. But if people don't like anything that you're doing there, then it's fine. You can say, okay, that's not the universe for you. There's the other universes that you can go and explore. There's the Horowitz verse, or the Diva verse, if you want a modern day James Bond. But I love the idea of this being a trilogy, though, because that actually gives it the opportunity to have legs.
I think so too, and I'm really excited that this is a trilogy, because I want more Bond stories told in this style. I think Sherwood has a really brilliant style that somehow is Fleming but isn't Fleming at the same time, and it never feels like a pastiche. I think that she's so good at imagery, and sometimes she chooses. I mean, when I interviewed her, she said her editor makes her take out some of her imagery because she perhaps uses it a bit too much. But I think she gets the balance perfect in the final manuscript. Certainly, I think she gets that balance perfectly, because I think sometimes Fleming is almost embarrassed by his poetic passages. I mean, there are so many brilliant poetic passages in Fleming, like staggering. As a teacher, I've used so many extracts of his with students. I'm just off the top of my head. You've got the centipede attack in Dr. No. He's just such a staggeringly brilliant piece of writing. The whole opening of On Her Majesty's Secret Service at the beach, and the kind of brief flashback to childhood. But sometimes in those passages, it's kind of like Fleming will take you so far and you think, wow, that's a really beautiful piece of prose, and then he'll kind of undercut it with something. Whereas Sherwood, for me anyway, and this is just maybe a personal preference thing, she sometimes pushes that a little bit further than Fleming would. And I can't remember the exact extract, but there's this amazing sentence towards the start of the book. I won't be able to find it while we're talking, but there's this amazing sentence where it talks about Bond having, as I say, even though Bond's not in this, he is in this. And this part about Bond essentially losing what was left of his emotions, what was left of his heart. And it lists the three major tragedies of his life, but does it in the most poetic fashion possible, like the death of his parents, the loss of Vesper and Tracy. And there's this exquisite sentence which is just like, oh my god, this is brilliantly literary writing within Bond, and I've always maintained that Fleming is very literary in some regards. But then it's also, and then you know, a couple of paragraphs later, it's like the most exciting action set piece, which you thought, oh my god, how many millions would this cost to put on a cinema screen, if these ever did get turned into a movie or a TV series.
Yeah, and it's very. I think a lot of people who are James Bond fans who haven't read the books are surprised when they read it, because they have the very gentle, poetic, human, emotional thing. I mean, Casino Royale, James Bond is like, you know, he's telling her he loves her and how are you, darling, and he's quite I don't submissive, so to speak, to Vesper in that book, in a way that I think people wouldn't think of.
He's caring.
Yeah.
A lot of people just don't see Bond as a caring character. My favorite example, I love the one you just said, but my favorite example is in the Hildebrandt Rarity. One of my favorite Fleming short stories, because essentially Bond chastises himself. I posted about this the other day because one of my fish died.
Oh, my condolences.
My pond, I know, and I actually felt really upset.
That's okay. You're actually allowed to feel upset.
I know. We'd had this fish for 7 years. As soon as we had the pond, the first fish, and it appears to have died in some kind of bizarre accident. So nothing could have been done about it. We actually think the fish got a little bit too horny and chased after one of the fish that was pregnant, and then ended up kind of beaching themselves on the water filter thing. So that's what we think happened. So I know I'm laughing, but I was really, really upset. But
you're laughing while wiping tears away. I've never resonated with somebody so much about how to deal with like sadness.
I know.
Like, let me just laugh, and then it'll be fine.
Because Bond does it. This is one of the disturbing things I've emulated from Bond. One of many. Because what Bond does in Hildebrandt Rarity, he's like, he feels really devastated about this fish that's about to die. But then he's like, oh, pull yourself together. You know, it's just a fish. But of course, it isn't just the fish. It's also an analogy for the woman in that story. I think it's James Bond is most caring. And yeah, I love those sections of Fleming, which people don't immediately associate with Bond. That wrestling constantly with being, am I allowed to be a caring human being, or do I need to cut myself off emotionally?
Yeah, and he gets quite morose sometimes when he's, you know, depressed about having killed a Mexican or something like that. It gets to a very dark, melancholy place, and I think to some of us who sometimes have like dark places that you go to, that's one of the things about reading the book that you just cling on to. Just that's what I love about these hooks. But in terms of what Kim was doing, I love the way each of the different agents has this personal connection to Bond.
Yes,
this personal relationship, which is a thread that runs through the whole story. But it shows in some ways Bond tries to resist being a caring person, but he ends up being a caring person and ends up making a significant impact on the lives of these people, enough that they think of him when he's not there.
Exactly. I mean, Dryden is the only one who hasn't had much direct contact with Bond, but even so, there's a sense that Bond is this mythological character almost in MI6. But the people who have known him, you know, the fact that Bashir calls off, this is not much of a spoiler because it's very early on, but he calls off his engagement to Harwood because he loses Bond. He feels that guilt-ridden by his failure on that mission. And that's a really interesting bit of psychology, that that's essentially the reason why he calls off his personal connect. You know, and Johanna has had a sexual relationship with Bond previously,
but she's also engaged to Bashir, so there's that weird triangle.
Yeah, it isn't the only love triangle in the story as well, and it's even alluded to by the villain, which I won't say much more about. It's even alluded to by the villain in the closing pages, that, you know, maybe that two of the Bond and Bashir maybe had a relationship. And it's kind of, is it doing like the Silver with Skyfall thing where he's sort of trying to make them uncomfortable, or is this a very real possibility? And to me, it reads like a very real possibility, because otherwise it's not quite yet making full psychological sense why Bashir would have taken this quite so personally. But maybe I'm projecting, but that's what James Bond is always very good at allowing us to do, isn't it? Project onto these characters.
And that's great. That's why it's so wonderful. I love that it allows us to project onto them, because I think we do so many of those different things, we find ourselves in that, and it makes us as part of it. Let's quickly talk about, there's the other thing that I spoke about, it being set in the present day. There are some Bond fans who might be like, oh, I'm not sure about that, like my period pieces. There's also Moneypenny, which I think is such an interesting. So Moneypenny has gone from the dutiful secretary to a chief of staff. Is that right?
She's the chief of the double O's. Yes, she runs the double O's essentially. So M's over in Vauxhall, presumably at the real MI6 building in Vauxhall, the one that we see in the later movies. And then Moneypenny is it Regent's Park somewhere? Is running the double O section from there, which is I think where Fleming put the MI6 in his books. So she's essentially not moved offices, but she has moved roles, and it's entirely feasible and probably long overdue that has happened. But it allows us to have. I did think when I was reading it the first time, because the first half of the novel is setting up so much, and you have to tell yourself reading this book that it's a 3-book story. I know Kim Sherwood said that you can read them independently, but you're going to get most out of it if you read all 3 in this order. So the first half of the novel is so kind of full on in terms of realigning what we think of as James Bond's world, and who M is wearing Converse trainers, and who Moneypenny is. And I almost felt like I had to draw a diagram to kind of represent the new, double O section, because it was such a sort of paradigm shift from what we've had previously. And they've never really bothered fleshing out the double O section. But yeah, for me, it made perfect sense for Moneypenny to be running the double O's.
Well, I mean, Stella Rimington was head of MI6 for years. So like to think that a woman might possibly be in a senior position, having had an enormous amount of experience in that role, actually makes perfect sense.
And we all know from the Moneypenny diaries that which I know were period set, different universe, blah, 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 but palimpsest, the Moneypenny, Sherwood's a fan of the Moneypenny diaries as well. It's like, we know Moneypenny can do the action stuff as well if she needs to.
Which also is in like the Craig verse as well. Moneypenny was a field agent, and I like this. These are all the different verses. So we get maybe what would have happened if the Moneypenny diaries had continued, is she would have ended up as head of the 00 section in the 70s or something, and instead we get that in the Sherwood verse.
Mm-hmm.
But it's nice because it gives her some. She is an underused character. Despite being iconic.
Who's your favorite 00? I'm just really interested.
I loved Sid Bashir, just because I thought, I don't know, I think I felt it resonated with me, the challenge he had putting together what he does against his heritage. And I think when you first start the novel and he talks about, to save one life is to save all of humanity, says the man who is a killer. And it's an interesting thing for him to wrestle with, which I think he wrestles with more than Joanna or Joe do.
Johanna cold-bloodedly kills more people than anybody else in this book. I'm just like, she's the least sentimental of the 3 by some margin, I think.
And which I think is interesting because of the way that women have always been portrayed in popular Bond culture, or people's ideas of what Bond is. It's like, she is the least sentimental, she's the toughest, which to a certain extent, I know a lot of women who are like that. That's and in some ways she is I would say, would you say she's like the leader of the 3 when it comes to making the toughest calls?
Yeah, the weird thing is we never actually see Dryden and the other 2 interact. So I'm quite interested in seeing that in the next book, because they're never in there, unless I've missed something, but they're never in the same room together. So Dryden's almost got like a separate part. They've all got their own parts of the story, but Harwood and Bashir interact quite a lot, particularly as the book goes on, and right from the start, in fact. But Dryden is sort of always off on his own a little bit. So
and yet there's that weird thread of all of them having, well, he's aware of James Bond. He doesn't have the same relationship with them.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting you say that, because I thought that Bashir was by far the most romantic of the characters. and again, considering your profession, I wasn't sure which character you'd go with actually.
I think maybe it was part of that with Sid. I can kind of I mean, there must be a lot going through his head. You know, he's engaged to Joanna, but she had a relationship with James Bond, and Bashir, let's say he was very close friends with James Bond. He saw him as a mentor, and then he feels personal responsibility for Bond going missing. And it's like, and he must also understand the impact that has on Joanna, that he blames himself for, and probably projects that she blames him. And it's, I don't know, that kind of complicatedness resonated with me quite strongly.
I mean, as a you know, considering your profession, how do you feel this compares with Fleming in terms of it being romance fiction? I'm very wary of us treading on kind of stereotypical ground here, because I know you've spoken really eloquently and really powerfully about feeling that sort of minority stress, if we want to put it that way, of being a man who writes romance fiction. And obviously you wrote the word which is to do with pseudonym. Never say pseudonymously. So you wrote that way for many years, and then essentially came out as, you know, a romance novelist. Whereas there might be a risk of it almost being the reverse here, because some of the newspapers here have erroneously said this is the first time a woman has written a Bond book.
Oh God, yes.
Yeah, I know. And it's like, no, see Moneypenny Diaries. But so we have to be careful we don't kind of go the other way and fall into that trap of, because it's written by a woman, it's going to be more romantic. I actually think the reverse.
I would agree with you. I would definitely agree with you.
The love stories are great, but they're not, for me, and I'm nowhere near as much of an expert as you, but it doesn't read like romance fiction as much as most of Fleming does.
I 100% agree with that assessment. And I think maybe that's why, again, I was resonated with Sid a lot, because that James Bond has been quite romantic in his past. So that was, you know, there are different elements to James Bond that that resonate with us. And in some ways, in the Double or Nothing, that those things get split between three characters. And I think maybe that's why we resonate towards different characters. And so for me, perhaps that romanticism is what made me feel drawn to like Sid's character. Oh, that was, yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. But now I think about it, I think that's the thing. All of these elements about James Bond, we pick one or two that really resonate with us, and then they're like broken up among these three characters.
I always think Bond is a bit like a Rorschach test, because it's really interesting. I appeared on a podcast the other day, really, really nice podcast to be on. But when we were talking about what we liked about James Bond, and this has happened many times on lots of different podcasts, it's really interesting. I always try to get the person who's interviewing me to tell me what they think first, because sometimes some podcasts, and you know, we've all got our niche and things, but some podcasts will talk about the lifestyle elements of Bond, and some of that appeals, you know, some of the clothing, and you know, especially the cocktails and all that sort of stuff. Cars less so, and whatever. But that means more to some people. For some people, it's kind of the romantic elements, and for some people, it's this, and this, and this. And it must be a hell of a job to try and, you know, the pressure of writing one of these books and thinking, I've got to get it right for all of these different people, because some of the continuation novels, I think, are better at some things than others. Like the Sebastian Faulks one has a reputation for being really good on the food and drink, for instance, which I think is justified. But some people think it falls down in other areas. Whereas for me, this is the continuation novel, and I enjoy all of them to varying degrees. I've never not enjoyed reading a continuation novel on some level, but for me, this is the one that gets all of the ingredients. Yeah, maybe a few more cocktails, you know. Yeah, that maybe a bit more kind of obsession.
I wonder if Kim's going to watch this. More cocktails, Kim.
Well, I have actually made a Double or Nothing cocktail, which Kim has asked me to make her at some point. So when I'm actually going to see her face to face for the first time ever tomorrow. So I'm not sure.
Wow.
I'm not sure I'll be able to do that myself, because we're at the launch at the publishing house. But yeah, so I think perhaps a bit more cocktail, but she does include the Moneypenny cocktail from the Ian Fleming cocktail recipe book as well. So there is that in there for the cocktail fans. It's almost like, how do you resist not having, I might ask her this again, I didn't ask her before, but how do you resist not having almost like the Bond checklist of all the different things, the different ingredients, and which ingredient am I going to put more in? Because I like that ingredient. And so John Gardner was always really, partially because of his own Navy heritage, was always really big on the hardware and always was really specific. And I'll be honest, my eyes kind of glaze over those details. I'm just like, yeah, I have no idea what they're going on about here with this engine size and whatever, because I don't care about that stuff. But as soon as you start talking about different kinds of gin, I'm like, yes, now I'm interested. But she manages to do all of that. There is a very car-y bit, interestingly, with the female character. There are 2 brilliant car chases in this. And the one which really kind of does the petrol head stuff is with Harwood. So you probably appreciated that, because I know you're more into that kind of thing.
I am, and it's I definitely like, and the first mention of Aston Martins comes in within like the first 50 pages, I think. And it is, for me, yeah, Petrolhead. I was like into that. And the romantic elements with Sid.
Isn't it the DB3 from the Goldfinger?
Because that's Goldfinger. Yeah, he drove a DB3 and they made it a DB5 in the movie. So,
but Bond still got a DB3 in this.
I think you nailed it with that. For me, I'm very lucky because I write my own books in my own universe.
Yeah.
And the thing with self-publishing is you get such a massive increase in royalty that you don't need to write for that many people. If you can have 10,000 people, which is a drop in the ocean in terms of the number of people who buy books on Kindle, to be your fans, and you write a book, every 6 months or something, that's a living. And all you have to do, you don't have to appeal to everyone, you just have to appeal to them. And I think there's a huge weight of responsibility for Kim to like write a book that appeals to everybody, but maybe she doesn't have to. As you said, if you really want to look at the lifestyle elements, you could read Sebastian Faulk's book. But if you're more into like the thriller action elements, you could read Benson's books. Or if you want the real historical period stuff, you read the Horowitz books. And if you want this, then you read the Sherwood books. And there are so many books, and I think you could be forgiven for not being a completionist. I mean, so many people are like, which John Gardner book should I start on to read the continuation novels? And I'm like, you know what? Maybe put those on the back shelf and read some of the better ones first, and then you can go and look at those afterwards, because it's quite a slog.
I will do. I think there's still 2 or 3 John Gardners I haven't read. So yeah, but yeah, I largely agree with what you're saying.
Because I remember as a teenager reading like for Special Services where Bond hooks up with Leiter's daughter, and I was just like, what am I reading?
I know.
So yeah, so you don't have to read everything. You have to read the ones that make you happy, and I think that's the great thing about what Kim's doing, is she's like got a book that clearly has all of the elements that make you happy.
Totally. I mean, it's very rare, isn't it, where you are reading a novel and you almost feel like it has been written for you, which is a very egomaniacal thing to say. But as I was reading it, I was like, yes, it's got all the ingredients, including some things I didn't know I wanted, like Q as a quantum computer. I'm like, wow, what an idea.
I love that. That's cute. I mean, talk about the plot. Let's talk about the plot, because we only got a few minutes left. But it has a very James Bond plot with a James Bond villain. I mean, how did you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm not going to try not to give away everything here, because I'm not sure how spoilerific we're going to mark this episode up as. But I mean, the plot has actually got only more resonant since she's written it. Yeah. So it's very current, but the way that it's framed as well by Moneypenny, as these are the implications of this, which I think are going to pay off in the later books as well. And the stuff about I'm not spoiling anything really here because it's not yet quite paid off, I don't think, but about the sunspots and that side of things, which appears on the cover design of the proof and the finished version. I think some of those elements are going to come back in,
which is what you want in a trilogy that rewards you for reading the whole thing.
So no, I bought the villain's plot completely, and I don't want to say which type of villain he is, but he very much, as well as being a really interesting character in his own right, he does recall a particular kind of Fleming villain who has not appeared in the films as much as people might think, actually. But I really like that villain type.
I think we've been missing villains in their movies, at least to a certain extent. I mean, I liked Safin, but I didn't quite understand what he was doing. Blofeld was the pissed off brother inspector. It's like all of this is just, so I think we're missing like one of those elements of the iconic James Bond villain and his big scheme. So that's nice to get that.
I don't think it is giving too much away, because you meet him fairly early on, and it's like you clearly know he's a wrong un. You're told, you pretty much told this, but he's basically the philanthropist in sheep's clothing. He's the Hugo Drax type who looks beneficent, but below that exterior is clearly hatching something that's going to wipe out millions of people for profit, or revenge, or a mixture of both. Yeah.
The sad thing is, wiping out millions for profit is like something that we can all believe corporations might be capable of doing these days.
He's extremely believable.
Yeah, and that's really the scariest thing. Did you get so?
Yeah.
We are reaching the top of the hour, so I will let you go, because I've really enjoyed this conversation, though, and I'm excited. There is something you mentioned about how you feel like a book's written exactly for you, and I felt like that about a bunch of things that have been created recently. No Time to Die, I know a lot of people didn't like the ending and a lot of people didn't like certain elements, but I literally watched that movie and had tears streaming down my eyes thinking this was made for me, right? And because of elements like him being a dad, I'm a dad, and so that actually worked really well for me. It's not going to work for so many other people, but it doesn't necessarily have to.
I'm not a dad, and I don't plan to have children of my own, but I do have a 5-year-old niece. So yeah, I couldn't help. And she actually behaves, that really great scene in the back of the car where she's like she's got that bite on her. I'm just like, and people are like, oh, that must mean that it's a plot element and maybe she's contaminated. No, 5-year-olds just talk random nonsense a lot of the time. So I totally got that.
So yeah, I mean, that's I think one of the wonderful things about this book is finally, like, I think it validates so many more people out there, and just that's part of the thing that we want to do with Kim, is like, she's one of us, and so we want to celebrate it. One of us is doing something like this with the franchise that we love, which I think is exciting, because it says to all of us, the thing that we love, we can do things towards it and contribute to it as well.
Yeah, I think that's dead on. As again, I don't want it to appear like she's definitely not ticking diversity boxes for the sake of it. It's just opening up the Bond universe to a more. I mean, we haven't even touched on the elements of race, for instance, in the book, and it's very interesting. Its stance on colonialism, which the Bond film series, to be fair, has taken Bond to task for policing the world as the representative of a decadent, decayed empire. Those references have been creeping into the films more and more, and Bond was always, that's always there right from Fleming, that is essentially kind of keeping the British end up, even though there's not much of an end to keep up. But again, Fleming takes that and then does her own interesting thing with it.
Yeah, which I don't know. So what are your words? Anyone's listening to this and they're like, should I go and buy this book now? What are you going to say to them?
100% buy this book. Be prepared for it to really shake things up quite a bit. I'm going to try and resist the cheesy shaken and stirred reference that's just glaring us in the face right now. But it really does shake things up, and I think it's long overdue. Like you, I've really enjoyed the continuation books. I've really enjoyed the Horowitz books. But in terms of developing where Fleming left off, I think that they've been treading water a little bit. I think there are parts of that which are a bit more, especially that last chapter of the last Horowitz book, which pushed it in an interesting direction, which you could totally imagine Fleming going there if he'd had the opportunity to continue writing those books. But I think it's one of the best decisions that the Fleming estate could possibly have made, putting Kim Sherwood in charge of, and a real statement of intent, not just saying this is one book and we'll see how it goes, because a lot of continuation authors like Jeffrey Deaver, I really enjoyed Carte Blanche, but a lot of continuation authors have just done one, but actually saying, no, we're committing to 3 books here right from the outset. And she doesn't appear to have had much constraint placed on her. It's just like, here's the sandbox, knock yourself out.
And
So,
I agree with you 100%. I think it was just, I loved what Horowitz did, but you need a palate cleanser. You need something new.
Yeah.
You need a different flavor to enjoy it. But with the Bond things, all of the same elements are there and you can just play with them.
It breathes oxygen into the Bond universe, because I think, and especially I think this is a problem with things like lots of things I love. Like, I know you like Star Wars, like I love Star Wars, but I think things like that have become kind of too safe in a way. And really, you need whatever else is written, the books and things that push things in, more progressive directions, whatever. You need the films to breathe life into that universe, regardless of what happens with Bond 26. And I think this may even give the producers some confidence, depending on how this is received, to take some more bold actions with that. But regardless of how Bond 26 is eventually assembled, I can't help feeling like this is going to be part of its DNA as well.
That's really interesting. And I think maybe that's one of the great things about the Bond franchise, like taking a couple of years break. I know a lot of people are upset about that, but to me, it's like, maybe after what they just like Horowitz put a nail in the end of his trilogy. It's like Daniel Craig put a bunch of missiles in his coffin there. So we need to take a break, take a deep breath, and then revisit that. And this is the opportunity to go out there and have other pieces of Bond content that expand our mind about what we want to see in the next movie.
Absolutely.
Right. So my children are revolting because I think they demand to be fed. So I'm going to wrap this up.
They do need feeding. I've heard that
several times a day. Like
it's big will. I mean, I before we recorded, I purposely fed the cats so they'd leave us alone. So I can relate to an extent.
But this has been wonderful, David. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat to me. I really enjoyed going down this rabbit hole. So it's nice. And that's the thing. You can have conversation with different Bond fans and go down different rabbit holes. But I've really, really enjoyed this. And I really enjoy being able to read a book and talk to someone who's read the same book, because it's like we've meditated in the same person's head. We've meditated inside Kim's head, which is like a weird, intimate experience when you read somebody's book and it's somebody you know.
Absolutely.
Right, so I'm gonna wrap it up, but thanks very much. And you heard that from David himself. Go and buy the Double or Nothing right now. I'm Roland Hulme. I've sold 67,000 copies of my books. If you want to find out how I did it, I've got the link right here you can click. And otherwise, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more videos coming soon. Thank you.